What's going on, guys? We did it. We fucking did it. And in honor of this video, let me just tell you what this video is about. I finished Infinite Jest. I finished this behemoth of a book. It honestly feels really crazy, but in honor of finishing it, I wore this hoodie. It's like the colorway of the cover. I saw this hoodie in my closet and I thought it looked like super Infinite Jest vibes. But before we get into the video, you got the Diet Soda, the Day, Diet Dr. Pepper. So I actually finished this book a couple weeks ago. It took me literally one day under 2 months to read. So I don't know if you can see that, but I started reading it on the 15th of December, finished it on the 14th of February. It's just crazy. Like, honestly, it was definitely a slog at some points to get through it. I feel like a lot of people said it really started getting interesting after the first 300 pages. And I guess there's some truth to that. For me personally, I feel like around like page 500 out of the 1,000 pages, it started like really getting, like, just really sucking me into it. And there was some points where I was just totally engrossed in it, but there's also some points where I'm like, holy shit, I can't wait to finish this and be done with it. But after I finished it, it's just been on my mind, and I almost want to read it again. But I finished it a couple weeks ago, like I said, and I just wanted to wait to make this video so I could have a couple weeks to just sit with it, think about it, and kind of figure out how I feel about it. And I feel like I did. And right now, I did like my whole book process with it. So as I go with books, I'll underline, I'll stick a tab in it, because I don't want to constantly be stopping to take notes as I'm reading, because I feel like it just slows me down. It takes away from just enjoying the book. So I just underline, tab it, and then right now I'm in the process of transferring all the notes. The book, takes place around three subplots, or three main subplots. The first one being at the tennis academy, ETA, Enfield Tennis Academy, and mainly around Hal Incandenza, his family, and then all his teammates play like a good role in there as well. And it's kind of like just their day-to-day training and their regiments and their personal struggles and their aspirations, and like how they're kind of like coping with just like the super hard training day in and day out. And the second subplot would be Don Gately and Joel Van Dyne in the Enfield, like the halfway house, like a drug addiction recovery home. And then the third one being centered around pretty much like a terrorist group that are like bound to wheelchairs, and they're trying to change like the reconfiguration, because they pretty much made like a super continent with Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and they're trying to fight against it. And another agent that's working for, it's called Onan, the super continent that's working for Onan, and they're kind of just, I feel like, I don't want to say fillers, but their sections for like, I would say probably 70% of the book are just these two characters, Remy Marath and Hugh Steepley, pretty much sitting on a cliff and just having like philosophical like conversations on this cliff. And then toward the end of the book is when they start kind of executing their missions that they're on, and it gets a lot more like action packed, I guess you could say. So that's essentially like the subplots of the book. But I almost feel like the plot isn't as important to the book as what David Foster Wallace is trying to convey as far as his message. And one of the main things in the book, or I don't want to say main because I feel like it's always in the background, but it's constantly being talked about. So there's this film cartridge that is so entertaining, whoever watches it pretty much loses all desires to do anything else, and they go into this like vegetative state where they're just always wanting to just watch the film, and they end up dying because they don't want to eat, they don't want to drink, and they just end up dying. And there is also like a lot of talk, especially within Remy Marath and Steepley's conversations, about entertainment and how is it really worth watching that just to find out what it is if you're gonna die. And it almost feels like just like infinite scrolling on TikTok, just like, because that's essentially what you're doing when you're stuck in the infinite scroll. You're just wasting hours and hours and hours of your life without really thinking. And I mean, every minute that you're alive, you're also dying. And I think that's pretty adjacent to like the situation that we're going in right now, which is kind of funny, a little bit scary as well. But the book itself, I feel like, is almost a commentary on it, because there's over 300 footnotes in this. And so it's not really something where you can just kind of just sit and read. You're always like like this, like you're always having to flip back to the footnotes and really engage with the book. And so I feel like the book itself is almost David Foster Wallace saying, like, I'm not making just another thing to make you feel entertained. It's something that you really have to engage with and connect with and pay attention, and just not sit there idly and just consume it. So that's what the book itself almost felt like. And as far as like the main themes, it's hard to say it's just about one thing. Like, you almost want to say it's kind of about everything. And it's really just talking about like the human condition. The person that really like kind of inspired me to read this in the first place was Matt from Colossum Books. I'll put his YouTube video or YouTube channel right in the description, but he said it best. I feel like it's just about being a human and how hard it is, and just like the struggles that we all face. And there's a quote in the book. It goes like, deep down we're all the same in the fact that we all think we're going through something unique, something along those lines. It's not word for word verbatim, but it's true. I mean, a lot of us go through the same things, or go through similar things, or maybe different situations, but it makes us feel like similar things. And that's why they have a saying where like people say, like, oh, I've never had an original thought, which there's been so many millions of people like throughout history. Like, I'm really bad at math and statistics, but I mean, statistically, like, how possible is it for you to have like an original thought that no one's ever had before? And same thing goes with like emotions and feelings. And I feel like so many of us are going through like the same things, but we think we're the only ones going through it, and then it makes us feel vulnerable, and we don't want to talk to other people, and then that just leads to like further isolation and further that feeling that we're alone in the things that we're going through. And that's one of the biggest things as far as the tennis academy plot, with how he's a very disconnected person and he's very in his own head, and he does a lot of things and thinks a lot of things but keeps them to himself. And I feel like a lot of, as far as like the information we're given about like the other students at the academy, is that a lot of them are going through the same things, but none of them are talking about it, and they all just feel kind of alone in this academy. But even then, they do find certain ways to connect with each other. Like there's one portion where they're all kind of complaining and they're getting down about like all the training they're doing, and one of the younger students is saying like, oh, this sucks, like why are we being so negative? And Hal is telling him how it's not about like the complaining per se, it's more just the fact that they're complaining together and they have a common enemy, is what he said, as far as like the coaching and everything. That's why the coaches are so hard on them, because essentially they're all fighting for their spots on the team and fighting for their ranking. And so the coaches are making themselves the enemies for the students at the academy, so that way they could all band together and train, as opposed to villainizing each other because they want each other's rankings. And there's so many things in this book that are talked about and covered along all the characters. Addiction, as obviously because of the halfway house, generational trauma with the Incandenza family. It goes a lot into Hal's dad and then Hal's dad's dad, and kind of how Hal's grandfather treats their father Jim, and then Jim treats Oren and Hal a certain way, and just gets into like their whole family dynamic and just the generational trauma that they've kind of accumulated. Mindless entertainment, obviously, depression, human connection, ambition. I feel like that's a big thing in the tennis academy. Coping, this goes through all the subplots, because it talks about how we all give ourselves up to something and we all cope with it in different ways. So obviously in the halfway house, a lot of people give themselves up to drugs, drinking, narcotics, all that type of thing. How the tennis students cope with going through their training, like Hal secretly smokes weed, and it's something that he doesn't tell anyone, and he doesn't necessarily keep it a secret because he's embarrassed or ashamed. It almost just feels like more fun to him. And then religion, that's a big part in like the halfway house. The character Don Gately is struggling with the idea of religion and the idea of God, because like in those 12-step groups, like it's like instead of giving yourself up to the drug, you give yourself up to a higher power. And they say higher power in terms of like just whatever God makes sense to you, not necessarily like the Christian or Catholic God, but just whatever higher power makes sense to you. But when he's praying, like he finds it hard to feel like he's talking to someone, or that something's listening. He's just talking to the ceiling. And so just like his struggle with believing in God and religion, and just like a coming of age story. There's so many characters where they have their quirks, they're a little bit weird, and you wonder why they do certain things. But throughout the book, you get droplets of information and little portions and the characters' backstories, and it all just starts making sense of why they are the way they are and why they do the things they do. And I have a lot of tabs, and I'm obviously not gonna go through all of them, but I'm just gonna flip open to a couple random ones and analyze them a little bit or give my thoughts on it. if there's any that are too spoiler, I'll skip them because I want this to be a spoiler free review slash wrap up. All boring activities become perversely much less boring if you're concentrating intently on them. Sometimes human beings have to just sit in one place and like hurt, that you will become way less concerned with what other people think of you when you realize how seldom they do. Concentrating that intently on anything is very hard work. Most substance addicted people are also addicted to thinking, meaning they have a compulsive and unhealthy relationship with their own thinking. So this was actually, I'm actually glad this is a part that I'm working on for adding to my Obsidian, so that's why I opened to it, I guess. But that portion is something you don't really think about, especially if you're not addicted to drugs, just because it's something we all do. A lot of people avoid thinking too deeply into certain things, or they avoid trying to analyze their emotions or their thoughts just because it's scary. And some people, I mean, like in the Tennis Academy, I'll keep giving examples from the book. In the Tennis Academy, people are coping with their thinking or distracting themselves, keeping themselves occupied with training and doing their schoolwork. And then obviously in this part they're talking about addicts, and a lot of people, especially if you grew up with like some type of trauma or go through things, they cover it up with drugs just because it makes you feel good and it masks the thoughts. And I guess that's what can lead to addiction down the road. And a lot of times, like, to be able to get past those emotions that bring you so much like hostility in your mind, you just have to really like sit down and think about it, even if it really hurts. You just gotta break it down to yourself. And I guess I'm talking about kind of like a CBT style of therapy, but just really ask yourself, like, is what I'm thinking grounded in fact? And if it is that something I could change, or is it not? Because if it's not, you just kind of have to accept it and just go through like this whole like laundry list of steps to really see like how grounded like these like thoughts are, and whether you can do something about it or just accept it and have to move on. But it's hard work, and it's scary. And so that's why a lot of people want to avoid the work, and rightfully so. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing to want to avoid those thoughts, but they cover it up with like drugs and being addicted or training or anything like that. Never trust a man on the subject of his own parents. As tall and basso as a man might be on the outside, he nevertheless sees his parents from the perspective of a tiny child still, and will always. And the unhappier his childhood was, the more arrested will be his perspective on it. She's learned this through sheer experience. So this is Joelle talking about Oren, Hal's older brother. And this goes with like what I was saying about the big theme being also generational trauma, because it is true. Like, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say just for men specific. I think for anyone that has trauma relating to their parents, it's hard to let go of feeling that through the perspective of like when you're still a kid. Because when you're a kid, like, your parents are your whole world. They're the only people you see every single day. You see them for most of the day. They're the ones providing for you, taking care of you. And when they're the ones that make you feel small and give you that trauma, and it's hard to grow up and let go of that perspective, because because feelings when you're a kid are so strong. It's everything you know, and you haven't yet learned how to process emotions as a kid. So it's what's really ingrained in you. And the worse it is, I guess it's saying, is the more stuck you're going to be with that perspective, and like the effects that it can have on you as an adult, even if it wasn't that bad in some people's standards, it was bad to you, like when you were a kid and when you were small in comparison to your parents. And when you're older and you're describing it to other people, you might like subconsciously exaggerate it, because like like the reaction that people have had to it, like saying, oh, that's not that bad, like I went through this or I went through that, and just belittling your experiences, so you learn to exaggerate it. And so I think that's what she was trying to get at when she says like never trust a man on the topic of his parents or anything like that. But there's just so many sections in this. I think I'll just leave it at that, just to give you like a small taste of kind of what the book is talking about. As far as book readability, I would argue that the book is actually very approachable, like in terms of just like following along and understanding it and enjoying it. Honestly, there's obviously a couple caveats to that, a couple hitches that you'll have to get over, but overall, like I feel like it's very approachable, and I don't think it's impossible to get through it. It's obviously a very big time commitment, and you're gonna have to put in some serious hours and weeks and months into reading this. But it is very approachable as far as like the writing style and like following the plot. There's a lot of big words, very just grandeur in his writing, David Foster Wallace's, and uses a lot of big words that you're definitely gonna have to stop and look up. Or if you're, that's why I liked reading on my Kindle so much, because you just highlight it and it gives you the definition right there. But and also a lot of words that are made up, I mean, to my knowledge, that you just kind of have to use context clues to understand. And also, like I said, the constant flipping back to the footnotes. I didn't really think it was too much of a big deal, but I mean, I'm sure I could definitely see it being kind of annoying to some people. And the pacing of it, honestly, the pacing of it, I really liked the pacing. So like I said, I felt like I didn't really like start like getting fully immersed and enjoying the book until about like halfway through, like the 500 page mark. Just because you're really like starting the book with no knowledge as to the world they're living in. You just kind of, you start the book in a random scene, and as the book progresses, like you get more and more sections learning more of the characters, the world they're living in, their origin stories. And in the beginning, it's super long passages, so you'll be with this character for a extended amount of time, then you'll be with this character for this extended amount of time, and then as the book goes, like the last like 300 pages, it was just like a couple paragraphs of this character jumps to this character, couple paragraphs back to this character, and it's a lot of like going back and forth. But and also in the beginning of the book, you get like these passages about these characters, but you're like, okay, well, like, why does this matter? Why are you telling me this? Or how is this character going to connect to this character in the end? Or do they even ever connect? And as you go along, you get more information about each character, and then you start seeing the connections that these characters have in their past and in what's going on right now in this moment in the book. And it all just starts clicking. And then when like those passages start getting shorter and shorter and they start connecting, you start like really getting into it and having fun with it, just because now it's all making sense and it's all connecting. And one quick note on the footnotes as well, you really shouldn't skip the footnotes. You should really take the time to stop, go back to the footnotes, because some of the footnotes are actually like pages and pages long just for one footnote. And if you skip that, that's a lot of like information that you're missing out on. So you really shouldn't skip the footnotes. And then should you read it? The book definitely isn't for everyone, I would say, but just like the value I gained from it and just like the insights that the book gives you, like I feel like it is definitely worth the read for everyone. I mean, like there was like sections in the book where it was funny. I genuinely like laughed out loud. There's books that are like there's sections, I mean, that are very deep and philosophical, and it really makes you think, and it gives you like a different perspective on the world and society as a whole, and just gives you like different ways of thinking. Like honestly, like I feel like I think very differently, or I see certain things very differently now. Just forced you to have more empathy for addiction or people that are addicted to things. It's because you spend so much time with these characters that are addicted or recovering from addiction, and you get so much of their backstory and you learn so much about them. Like you can't not empathize with them. And just overall, just and there's some heartbreaking moments that are just like actually like genuinely very sad, and it just like kind of shakes you to your core and makes you really like feel for these characters, and just like commentary on like the human condition and like society as a whole. And I mean, this book was written in the 90s, and it's commenting like very closely on what the world's going through today. So I feel like that alone makes it worth the read. And as far as myself, I'm fucking definitely very glad I read this book, and very proud of myself as well. It's probably the most challenging book I've read, the longest book I've read, definitely. And I will definitely read it multiple times again in my lifetime. I definitely want to read it again, same way I did it, straight through, going back to the footnotes. But I was on these, after I read the book, I was like, what the fuck just happened with the ending? And like I went on forums and kind of like, all right, like I just looked up Infinite Jest ending explained, and I came across a couple forums, and it kind of jogged my memory about things from the beginning that make the ending make more sense. And also like the book's not written 100% chronological order. Like each each section or passage is like dated, and it's not in chronological order. So um I'm gonna read it again same way, and then I definitely want to read it in chronological order to see how the story works like that. And I saw on this forum of a different way to read it that I kind of didn't really think about it this way, but it is like a way to read it if you've already read it multiple times, I feel like, and you already have like the general idea and background knowledge. So it's to read it all the way through and then read all the footnotes all the way through at the end after you already finished the main section. And he described it as almost like watching a movie and then getting the footnotes as like when you have a DVD and it has like, oh, the behind the scenes or like the director's cut or whatever it may be. And I thought that was interesting, so that's definitely a way that I want to read it later on down the road as well. And finally, like my rating of the book, it's one of I think it's actually the first book I gave 5 stars this year, or at least one of the first books I read, or one of the first books that I gave 5 stars this year. It is very good. Like it was long, and I was at some points I was excited to finish it, but like I mean I can't stop thinking about it. It changed my point of view on a lot of things, and it did give me a lot of value throughout. And yeah, so definitely 5 stars. And I just want to do this together on camera whenever I finish reading a book. I put a little red dot on the spine, so like on my bookshelf I could see what books I've read and what books still have yet to be read. So we're gonna do this together. Look at that. That means I read it. So that much into, so these are the notes I finished. So I'm gonna finish up the notes on this book. Once I have that all loaded up into my Obsidian, then I could put it back on my shelf and be done with it for at least a couple years until it's time to read it again. I'm planning on maybe waiting like another 2 to 3 years before I reread it, just so I could have enough time to have some distance from the book, so I could kind of forget like exactly like the small details of like what happened, so I could come into it with like a somewhat fresh perspective, but also already kind of knowing what's going on, so I could get this like a deeper insight into it. But I'm glad that is over with, and thanks guys for watching. Next video will be a January and February reading wrap up. I've actually read a lot of books in January and February, I think 9, which is pretty good for me. But after I was done with this book, I was just so excited to read like other like smaller books that I've been excited to get into. So I knocked out a bunch, and next video will just be like my reading wrap up for January and February, and just talking about what books I've read and what I thought about it. But see you guys next time.